Let's talk to Peter Hitchens, columnist, of course, at the Mail on Sunday. Peter, very good morning to you.
Morning.
Do you have a preferred gravy scenario?
No, I used to make a very good steak and pigeon pie with...
steak and pigeon pie? That's a...
Yeah, it's a very good combination, particularly if you make a sauce out of Guinness. But it's a long time since I did any cooking. Life took over, so I've more or less forgotten how to do it. But that was good. And if you can find the recipe for it, which I think was somebody called Jocasta Innes, I do recommend it. I was good at it once, but I've forgotten how.
Yeah. Well, listen, we can say that about many things, I suppose.
Well, we could.
I used to be good at that, but not so much anymore. I noticed you've written a piece this morning about Lucy Letby because
I'm afraid it came up.
She's back in the news again, isn't she?
Yeah, it was an unavoidable subject because of the relief that the police were looking into more allegations against her, and I can't see the point of this unless for some reason they want to keep her in prison after she's dead.
Right. I mean, I suppose the counter argument to that is if she is responsible for other deaths, then we should investigate, no?
Well, yes, if she is, but the current argument, which I think the police and the prosecuting authorities and indeed the government want to steer us away from, is whether there were any crimes in the first place. The things of which she's been convicted weren't necessarily crimes. And the real question, which anybody who looks into this is immediately confronted with, was what was the real reason for the deaths of the babies who died and for the problems of those she was accused of trying to kill. And there never has been, and I stress this, and if you ask serious people who support the conviction, they'll agree with this, that there never has been a single piece of objective evidence that Lucy Letby did anything wrong. And yet there she is, locked away in Bronzefield Prison in Surrey with no hope of release, perhaps 60, 70 years ahead of her, sitting in a small room, which if she is not guilty, and I have no idea whether she's guilty or not, but if she is not guilty, it's absolutely shocking that we should tolerate those circumstances, which is why I and quite a large, growing number of people have come to the conclusion that we should campaign for the case to be reopened. At the weekend, I wasn't there, but about 30 people who were genuine experts in the medical and statistical aspects of this got together and went through the many ways in which they found the conviction worrying and unsafe. And with a collection of people like that now speaking in those terms, I think it really is time, both at the prosecuting authorities and I'd say particularly the big broadcasters such as the BBC, began to treat this conviction as far less certain than they often portray it. We have at the moment, for instance, the Thirlwall inquiry into the case, which refuses even to consider the possibility that she might not be guilty. It's just it's not.
Well, I was going to say I was watching the news last night, and they were showing clips from that inquiry, which didn't really seem to have anything other than people saying, well, you know, we're pretty sure that she may have done other things, and you know, we think that she's a very flawed individual, and you know, I mean, obviously, without sitting there and taking in all of the inquiry, I don't know what else was being said, but certainly the clips that were being used were very, shall we say, pro the prosecution.
Well, it has to be. It's like having a one-sided trial. There is no discussion of any other possibility. And when Mark MacDonald, Lucy Letby's new barrister, asked permission to come and represent her interests at this inquiry, which, considering that every day people stand up and say what a wicked and cruel woman she is, the inquiry refused to allow him to do so, which I would have thought was a straightforward defiance of natural justice. Surely, if she is being constantly denounced, there should at least be somebody there to answer these denunciations, but nothing. But the other point about these new investigations, if they lead to charge and prosecution, during all the many months after charge, everyone in the media will be under very strict rules about what we can say about the case, and the whole public discussion of it will cease.
Yes. Do you worry about that in general at the moment?
I worry about it enormously. I'm very much in favour of these rules, by the way. I think that we do better than the Americans on this in preventing a public discussion of cases which ought to be considered by courts. And I support those rules, but I think that under the circumstances when she's already been punished to the full extent of the law and no more can be done, one has to ask what the purpose of this expedition is.
Well, that's when it starts for me to get slightly sort of Alice in Wonderland time, because if you know that you're going to have another trial of somebody who has already been convicted of murder, you can't, untell people that she's been convicted of murder. People know people know that she has been. So the fact that you then can't discuss anything else before the next trial just seems to me to be slightly outmoded and slightly kind of ridiculous.
Well, indeed, that is true. But again, I don't want to be the person who says I'm against it. I think the second trial of the charge of attempted murder on which she was convicted couldn't conceivably have been conducted fairly, especially so soon after the first one. I think there is another element of this which is perhaps more worrying for the prosecution side and might conceivably restrain them, which is that given so many people have now raised difficulties about it, and given that I think she would have what one might call a more aggressive defence if any of these new charges do come to trial. There is a possibility, which I don't actually think there was realistically in the first trial, that she might be acquitted. I think the first trial, it's very hard to put this together, but I think the atmosphere created around it led to there being an effective presumption of guilt throughout the trial. And she didn't really benefit from the presumption of innocence. But I think if she does come up for trial again, I think it might be rather more evenly matched. And that if she were acquitted on any of these charges, then that would, of course, change the position entirely. It's complicated and difficult, and as I say, puzzling. And that's what I've written about in the Daily Mail today, and it does continue to concern me.
Yeah.
But if she is innocent, and she says she is, and the evidence against her is highly questionable, then I think all civilized people, whatever they think about this, must be concerned that justice should be done. And I can't see why anybody, even those who think that she's justly in prison, should be worried by a reopening of the case, because if they're confident of their arguments, what have they got to lose?
Yeah. No, I tend to agree with that. I mean, I don't know any more than you do. I probably know less than you do about the case. I do remember that she behaved in a slightly unusual and kind of, strange way while the case was on.
Can I point something out about that, which isn't as widely known as it should be? It's actually described in some detail in the very interesting new book, Unmasking Lucy Letby by Judith Moritz and Jonathan Coffey, which I had expected to be very much a sort of she's guilty and deserves to die in prison, and it is nothing of the kind. It's a very fair and balanced book, which I recommend to anybody. But one of the things which it mentions, which wasn't much mentioned at the time, is that the initial trial was delayed by a week because Miss Letby was in such a terrible state that her barrister argued she wasn't really fit to appear. And you must know that ever since really the police investigation into her began, she's been on quite strong medication of some kind or another. And so, however, her performance in the witness box can't really be used, I think, under the circumstances, to condemn her.
No, I'm not wishing to condemn her. I'm just saying that.
No. I just say people often do. They say, you weren't there in the courtroom. You didn't see her in the witness box. We did, and I think, well, I don't know how any of us would, how you would, or I would, or any of the journalists and others who says how we look after 23 months. On remand as a technically innocent person in prison, 23 months between final arrest and appearance in court, and all the terrible things which one suspects happens to someone in those circumstances. How any of us would look in the witness box, or how we perform. And I think people should be very careful about using that as some kind of clincher. It's not as if she said anything during that time in the witness box which convicted her.
No, I agree with that. But it brings me to the terrible state of the justice system, because I read a piece in the Telegraph yesterday in which it said that, clever criminals nowadays are starting to work out that if they plead not guilty at the first hearing at which they face a criminal court, their case is more than likely to be delayed for at least 2 years. They're more than likely to lose any witnesses that may have come for the prosecution, and they're even more likely to probably just never see a courtroom again.
It is perfectly possible that the criminal justice system in this country is in a state of very severe crisis. It's been gravely neglected, and indeed large parts of it have been shut down. Legal aid has been minced up and made unavailable to a lot of people. The functioning of it, I don't agree with him or her, the person who writes under the name the secret barrister, on a lot of things, but the denunciation of the terrible state of the system, which the secret barrister makes in the books he or she has published, are absolutely spot on. It simply isn't working in the way that it used to. It is overwhelmed, and if we want to carry on being a civilized country, we need to embark on serious reform of it. And by that I do not mean cheapskate removals of things like jury trial. Right. I mean the willingness to actually spend money on justice. Justice is expensive, but a country without justice is so squalid and actually quite often becomes corrupt that justice is well worth spending money on. And any civilized person of any political opinion should be very keen on making sure that our justice system is rescued from its current terrible state.
Yes, I think that's absolutely right. Good to talk to you, Peter. Thanks very much indeed. Peter Hitchens, columnist at the Mail on Sunday.